the Hamilton scheme, which I did subtitle An Epic Tale, because I really think it is. I don't think I'm overhyping it, although it sounds a little hypey, but I just said I got to go for it because I believe this. But it is an epic tale of money and power, which is what I've been really working on this whole time, I realized. I mean, so this book in some ways brings together in a coherent single narrative much of what I've already been sort of exploring. But to do that, I had to rethink a lot of it and re-experience it imaginatively. And so Hamilton, he is the central character really in the book, but it's also an ensemble piece. And I'm just trying to get into the kind of intensity of the relationships, the political relationships, which are also personal relationships for these guys, and the fights. I mean, the alliances, but also the knockdown, drag out fights over money and power in America, which begin in the founding and don't get resolved in any, beautiful, perfect way in the founding, or really haven't been ever since. So I think there's a lot of resonance for current conflicts as well. So Hamilton, I mean, I was writing about Hamilton in the Whiskey Rebellion. I wrote about him in Founding Finance. But when I was first writing about Hamilton, not everybody was even 100% clear on who he really was. And then along came this incredible cultural phenomenon, the Hamilton musical. And then everybody kind of thought they knew who Hamilton was. And that's great for me because it's a hook, because people actually really care about Hamilton. But the more you look into him, it's not it's not super positive. But it's also not as negative as some people might think, my take on Hamilton, because my thing is more like the more you look into what he was doing, the more fascinating and complicated and kind of, I don't know, stunning in some ways it is. And then again, the people who were trying to oppose him also become, you start to see them in a different way when you look at what he was really trying to do. And then there are people who we never heard of, just as in Declaration, there are people who we've rarely heard of who are just as fascinating as Hamilton and just as complicated and it's just as poignant, it's just as comical. It's all the things that, when I say Shakespearean, that's kind of what I mean. It's all of those things. So Hamilton is like a galvanizing figure to me for how to understand this way of looking at the founding. So as the first Treasury Secretary of the United States, Washington's first Treasury Secretary, so it's all new, he was trying to bring about something he had been working on bringing about for years before. I mean, from a very early age. He's young when all this stuff's happening. He was trying to bring about as Treasury Secretary a program that he developed before the country was really a country, before it had a national government. The driver for Hamilton of forming a national government at all was to consolidate the wealth of the nation in a dynamic way, to make the United States a powerful player, powerful, rich global player. And he started working on that long before there was any real likely possibility of it happening. So it was a visionary thing. He had a mentor that people don't talk about it doesn't come up in the musical, and not in all the biographies either very much. A fascinating, idiosyncratic, strange character named Robert Morris, who is perhaps one of our most fascinating founders. And yet, because he was the first banker, because he was flamboyantly corrupt, because he was just an amazing sort of, I don't know, larger than life figure, he's embarrassing to talk about sometimes as one of our most important founders, but he was, and he was Hamilton's mentor. So this kind of colorful situation develops where Hamilton and Morris are trying to bring about things regarding finance, founding finance, that they can only get if they throw out the Continental Congress and the Articles of Confederation and have a redo and create a national government. Because for a long time, they tried to sort of bring about the things they wanted more willy-nilly with the existing structures. And then it became clear they couldn't. And they had allies in this, who include people who later became their enemies, like James Madison and others. They were all focused on the fact that without a national government to enforce it, you were not going to be able to pay the investors, the American investors in the war debt, their interest. And if the American investors in the war debt didn't get paid their interest, the richest people in the country would not be committed to having a national national government. But if you could get a national government that committed itself to paying that interest over a long period of time and enriching these already rich people, this small group of powerful, influential people, then you could have a country that had a national government and a national financial system and a national bank and all kinds of things like that, that are the kinds of things England had, that Britain had, the kind of things that make for powerful countries. So they had a very cogent, very clear rationale for what they were trying to do. It was very anti-democratic in a lot of ways. And at the same time, they saw it as critical to creating the United States as a solid, powerful nation. And that's why they were driving the country toward the Constitutional Convention by the time that happened. The way I try to bring the characters to life, which I think is kind of the driving thing of what I try to do to make all these ideas, play, is that I avoid writing cradle to grave biography, really. There are people in my books, there are characters in my book who they do die in somewhere along the line in the book, or you can run ahead to find out what happened to them and so forth. And there's a lot of biographical information. It's character driven, but I don't take, when Hamilton dies in the Hamilton scheme, it's like a sentence because he's out of office at that time and I've moved on and the country's moved on. So everybody wants to hear about the duel, of course. And in my next book, which is going to be about Burr's adventures after the duel, I will handle the duel. But I'm not going by the way I try to handle the kind of resolution issues or where's this book going, is I'm not going by and then this happened and then this happened and then this happened to this person. It's like, what's the drama? What's the action at this moment? So for the Hamilton scheme, I was pushed and encouraged by my editor, and it really paid off, although at first I didn't know if it would. I was pushed and encouraged by my editor to turn the corner for the first time in all of my work out of Hamilton's tenure in office and into the Jeffersonian period. And the final 4 chapters of the book really cover the career as Treasury Secretary of Albert Gallatin, who's so much less well known than Hamilton as Treasury Secretary, but was Treasury Secretary throughout all of Jefferson's and all of Madison's first term, and then part of Madison's second term. So he was Treasury Secretary through a long and incredibly important period. We've got like almost 16 years there. And Gallatin tried to undo Hamilton's systems. And the drama of his efforts in trying to do that, and his frustrations and his successes, and the sort of betrayal by his own party in the end and so forth, that becomes the drama to me toward the end of this book, not like the last days of Alexander Hamilton, for example. So one way to sort of structure these things to kind of lead to either resolutions or surprising climaxes, weird denouement and so forth, is to just sort of not stay in the kind of, the life story thing, but to pick up the life stories where they're happening, where they're dramatic, where someone's actually doing what they really did with their careers, and then working with that. And I think I've done that. The Hamilton scheme is the most challenging of the books in that regard because it really is focused largely on one character. But it was critical to make that an ensemble piece. And it was also critical to make that story turn the corner. And for me, as a writer and researcher and student of all this stuff, to confront my views of what happened, not just during Hamilton's tenure, but during Jefferson's presidency when it comes to Gallatinian finance.